The film opens with a group of school bullies, led by a student named Miles. They come to school with the sole purpose of threatening and tormenting those they consider weak. One of their frequent targets is Jimmy Mulligan, a kind-hearted, chubby boy. Despite enduring constant bullying from Miles, Jimmy never retaliates. Accompanying him are his two loyal friends, Andy and Bobby, both of whom are also seen as losers in the eyes of the bullies. Gradually, the endless mockery and humiliation from Miles wears Jimmy down, exhausting his patience and endurance. Jimmy's mother had a feeling that something was wrong, but Jimmy always refused to share the struggles he faced after school. "Everything's fine, Mom," he reassured her. His friends invited him to hang out and relax, but he declined, knowing he might run into Miles, the bully who lived in the neighborhood. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Jimmy had hoped. One day on his way to school with his friends, he unexpectedly ran into Miles and his gang. Miles boldly demanded that Jimmy hand over $100, an amount far beyond what Jimmy could afford. Although Jimmy tried to explain that he didn't have that much money, his words only made the situation worse. Miles became increasingly aggressive, continuing to pressure Jimmy to give him $100, even threatening him to keep quiet about it. But just as the situation was escalating, Miles noticed Vinny standing at a distance, watching him, forcing him to back off. Vinny was known for being strong and courageous, with influential connections, and he never tolerated bullying. He always kept an eye on Miles and his gang, making even the toughest bullies think twice. In addition to bullying Jimmy, Miles frequently mocked Bobby for his somewhat feminine style. After Miles publicly humiliated Bobby in front of the whole class, Jimmy tried to comfort his friend. "Remember what you said? They're just idiots. I'm so tired of them. I've had enough." Afterward, Jimmy invited Andy and Bobby to lunch in the cafeteria and promised to treat them. Watching Jimmy enthusiastically devour large portions of food, Andy and Bobby were both surprised. However, Andy and Bobby never teased Jimmy about his appetite. They even tried to introduce him to a girl named Adrienne from their school. During their lunch breaks in the area, they often noticed Adrienne glancing at Jimmy with a look of genuine interest. But just as things were becoming comfortable, Miles appeared, sat down next to Jimmy, and continued demanding the $100 he had previously requested. Another student, frustrated by Miles' disruption, spoke up, telling him to stop bothering them and leave the cafeteria. "But why don't you leave him alone?" the student said. In response, Miles loudly shouted and rudely insulted the student he saw as weak, which made the atmosphere tense. However, another student, larger and stronger than Miles, decided to teach him a lesson for causing trouble. In an instant, Miles' aggressive demeanor vanished, and he quickly hurried out of the cafeteria. But after school, Miles confronted Jimmy again, continuing to demand money.
"I don't owe you anything."
Unable to tolerate Jimmy's defiance, Miles immediately attacked him right on the sidewalk. As Miles was about to land the final blow, an older man appeared and threatened to call the police, causing Miles to jump back and flee the scene. The man introduced himself as Mr. Action and offered to take Jimmy home to tend to his injuries. At Mr. Action's house, Jimmy noticed a photo of a boxer hanging on the wall and was surprised to learn that Mr. Action had once been a national boxing champion. Determined to confront Miles and put an end to the bullying, Jimmy earnestly begged Mr. Action to train him. Although willing to help, Mr. Action admitted that his age made it difficult for him to directly coach Jimmy, but he promised to reach out to some of his friends to assist with his training. After taking Jimmy home, Mr. Action faced his parents, who were horrified to see their son with a bruise around his eye. He explained what had happened and suggested that Jimmy take self-defense classes. Initially, Jimmy's parents hesitated and asked for more time to think it over. A few days later, Mr. Action heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, he found Jimmy standing there with both eyes bruised. "So, what have you decided?" he asked. Jimmy's parents, realizing the seriousness of the situation, were deeply grateful for Mr. Action's concern and immediately agreed to let him start boxing training. They even went with Jimmy to Manny's Boxing Training Center, a gym run by a close friend of Mr. Action, to make sure he received the proper training. "I hope you can teach Jimmy how to defend himself here," Mr. Action said to Manny, who immediately understood Jimmy's situation after hearing a brief summary. Despite the many blows Jimmy had endured, his determination impressed Manny. He agreed to help, on the condition that Jimmy committed to serious training and never gave up. Under Manny's rigorous boxing training program, Jimmy seized the opportunity and began training regularly, while Mr. Action closely monitored his progress. During one of the training sessions, Jimmy opened up and shared with Mr. Action how Miles had been repeatedly demanding $100 from him, which made Mr. Action even more determined to help Jimmy become stronger to face any challenge. In response, Mr. Action proposed a plan. Jimmy should ask Miles for $200, but with the condition that Miles would give him a month to prepare. He believed that within that time, Jimmy would learn the necessary skills to defeat Miles and not have to pay him the $200. "We need at least a month of serious effort to get started," he asserted. The next day, when Miles returned to demand the money, Jimmy calmly declared that he had found a part-time job after school and would receive his first paycheck in a month. "If you can wait a few more weeks instead of $100, I'll pay you $200. Miles felt that a month was too long, but eventually agreed, temporarily easing the pressure on Jimmy. For the first time in a long while, Jimmy no longer had to endure Miles' constant harassment for money. However, during his boxing training session with Manny that afternoon, Jimmy seemed lifeless and sluggish. He claimed to be tired, but with the sharp eye of a professional trainer, Manny noticed that Jimmy's fatigue wasn't physical, it was emotional. It's concerned, Manny began to talk to him, expressing his worry about Jimmy's emotional state and bluntly said, "I don't know what's going on with you, but I feel like you don't want to be here." On the way home, Mr. Action asked Jimmy why he seemed so discouraged. Jimmy admitted that he felt tired and frustrated, believing that all his efforts and training seemed pointless. He still felt weak in the face of Miles' bullying, unable to defend himself. "After everything I've done, I can still get kicked around," Jimmy said, feeling disheartened. Hearing the disappointment in Jimmy's voice, Mr. Action tried to comfort him, encouraging him that no effort was ever wasted, no matter the outcome. "The lessons you've learned through hard work will have lasting value," he said, going to help Jimmy regain his confidence. When Jimmy returned home, his father noticed that his health was gradually declining. However, he didn't force him, allowing Jimmy to make his own decision about continuing his training. Nonetheless, he shared a hope that one day Jimmy could teach his own children how to defend themselves. They wouldn't have to endure what he was going through. "One day, you might teach your kids, so they don't have to live in fear like you do now," he said. His father's words reignited the fire of determination in Jimmy. He reflected on them and felt that he had to push himself harder than ever, determined to train more seriously. The next day, Miles and his gang went after Jimmy and his friends again. This time, they went too far by beating Bobby right in front of the crowd. Jimmy quickly ran to Bobby, who was sitting alone, crying, and tried to comfort him. However, Bobby, in his despair, felt completely helpless against Miles and his gang. "What can you do? The teachers can't do anything either," Bobby said. Jimmy firmly disagreed, replying, "I have a plan. I'm going to beat Miles and put an end to this bullying once and for all." When he got home, Jimmy eagerly rushed to hop on his bike and ride straight to Manny's boxing gym, even though he usually needed Mr. Action to take him, because the gym was quite far. When he arrived, Mr. Action was thrilled by Jimmy's newfound enthusiasm for training. However, in his excitement, Jimmy accidentally bumped into Manny and fell to the ground. Manny didn't get angry, on the contrary. He was pleased to see Jimmy's growing determination in boxing, where Jimmy trained with unwavering willpower and intense passion. Noticing his progress, Manny intensified the training regimen, incorporating tougher physical exercises and mixed martial arts techniques to help Jimmy develop in a more well-rounded way. Meanwhile, Mr. Action continued to nurture Jimmy's mental strength, always offering advice and inspiration to bolster his fighting spirit. At school, Jimmy shared his boxing training and his goal of defeating Miles with Andy. Just then, Adrian approached Jimmy, and the two quickly agreed to hang out together. They attended a party at a friend's house, and throughout the evening, during their intimate conversations, Jimmy and Adrian discovered a strong connection and natural compatibility between them. As they immersed themselves in deep discussions, they both decided to begin a romantic relationship. As Jimmy enjoyed his new relationship with Adrian, Eddie, one of Miles' close friends, began to provoke and insult both of them, mocking Jimmy and his misfit girlfriend. However, unlike before, this time Jimmy was full of confidence. He stood up to Eddie and quickly made him back down. Time passed, and before long, the day came when Jimmy had to face Miles. But this time Jimmy was determined not to let Miles continue to extort or bully him any longer. That morning, Jimmy woke up with confidence and a strong determination. When he arrived at school, Miles immediately approached him, threatening to harm Jimmy's friends if he dared break his promise or try to avoid the confrontation. "What are you looking at?" Miles shouted, his tone harsh. Jimmy quickly ran into the bathroom, where he met a young man named Vinny, who had heard about the feud between Jimmy and Miles. Vinny knew that Jimmy had been training at Manny's gym and encouraged him, wishing him luck in the upcoming showdown. "Kick that guy's ass," Vinny cheered. However, neither Jimmy nor Vinny realized that Eddie had overheard their conversation from a nearby stall and quickly ran off to tell Miles. Under Miles' direction, Eddie contacted a notorious troublemaker named Billy Glassjaw and arranged for him to challenge Jimmy right at school. News of the upcoming showdown between Jimmy and Miles quickly spread, attracting the attention of everyone, all eager to see who would come out on top. Jimmy confidently walked toward Miles and his gang. Miles realized that Jimmy no longer feared his demands for money, so he quickly came up with a plan to defeat Jimmy, with the help of Glassjaw. However, Vinny intervened by sending his associates to kidnap Glassjaw, forcing Miles to face Jimmy in a fair fight. When the battle began, Jimmy struggled against Miles' powerful attacks, but he had no intention of giving up. Gradually, Jimmy started to fight back, landing some powerful blows of his own. Despite taking a hard punch to the face, Jimmy didn't falter. He was no longer the weak, overweight boy he once was, but someone capable of defending himself. With a strong determination in his heart, Jimmy fought not just for himself. With a strong determination in his heart, Jimmy fought not just for himself but to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. Miles grew increasingly desperate, and when his friends tried to rush in to help, Andy and Bobby stood aside, remaining silent and not intervening. Along with Jimmy, they had made the decision to stand up against. In the end, they defeated Miles, causing him to fail in this fight. After the victory, Jimmy faced Miles and firmly demanded that he stop his violent actions toward everyone. "It's cool," he stated. "Leave everyone alone, not just me, not just my friends, but everyone." However, Miles only appeared indifferent, showing no remorse. From a distance, Mr. Action, who had been watching the entire confrontation, felt incredibly proud of his student. Mr. Action realized that Jimmy still held a heart full of compassion, something that Jimmy had yet to fully recognize. The incident between Jimmy and Miles was quickly captured by witnesses and shared on social media platforms, causing the video to spread like wildfire. Before long, it attracted widespread attention from the community and even caught the eye of a local television station. The confrontation between Jimmy and the bully became a hot topic, with everyone praising Jimmy's courage as he stood up against the bullying he had endured. Jimmy's parents were also incredibly proud when they realized that their son could now stand strong and was no longer being bullied. The movie ends with a scene of Jimmy, Andy, Bobby, and Adrian becoming more confident, emerging as the ones who are noticed as cool after successfully eliminating the group of bullies who had terrorized students for so long. The final message is never underestimate the strength of those who are often overlooked. Even those who seem weak can surprise everyone and prove that they are much stronger than they appear.